The engine of one of the Navy's most advanced ships failed right on the eve of a major mission. Experts ran diagnostics, checked every sensor, tested every system, nothing worked. Just when it seemed like all hope was lost, someone brought up an old, forgotten name. When Sarah Mitchell walked in, grease-stained coveralls and a brass rod in hand, asking for complete silence, no one there realized she wasn't just there to fix a mechanical issue. She was there to restore something far deeper, her own story. Welcome to Silent Valor, where we honor the unsung heroes whose quiet strength changed everything. Before we dive into Sarah's incredible story, tell us in the comments what city you're watching from today, and if you believe some people deserve a second chance to prove their worth, hit that subscribe button. Sarah Mitchell lived just a few miles from the coast in Cedar Bay, Oregon. The garage she called home had once been a marine engine workshop decades ago. Now it was her shelter, her workplace, and her entire world. Stacks of old boat parts lined the weathered walls. Tools hung from worn wooden boards that had seen better days. And an old radio, still crackling to life each morning, played like a faithful companion keeping time. Since she was a girl, Sarah had an unusual gift with machines. She grew up taking apart discarded electronics she'd find in the scrapyard behind her father's auto shop, putting them back together with an intuition that amazed everyone who watched. At 12, she rebuilt a motorcycle engine using only salvaged parts. By 16, she was fixing her neighbor's boat motors without ever having formally studied marine mechanics. She seemed to understand the language of machines, their whispers, their complaints, their desperate cries for help, better than anyone else in 3 counties. IT was the kind of talent you couldn't teach in any classroom, couldn't learn from any manual. You were either born with it, or you weren't. Sarah was in her younger days. Sarah served as a chief engineering officer in the U.S. Navy. She worked on everything from aircraft carriers to destroyers, but her specialty was the complex propulsion systems that powered the fleet's most critical vessels. Her proudest achievement was helping develop the revolutionary MT-4000 engines for the Wellington-class destroyers back when they were still classified prototypes. At 45, Sarah's weathered hands told the story of 3 decades working with machinery that most engineers only dreamed of touching. She knew those MT-4000 engines like a mother knows her child's heartbeat, every vibration, every sound, every subtle change that signaled trouble ahead. But one catastrophic failure at sea during a routine training exercise changed everything. The engine on her ship, the USS Meridian, suffered what the investigation board called critical structural failure due to negligent maintenance oversight. The inquiry was swift and merciless. They blamed her, said she'd failed to perform proper preventive maintenance protocols, said she'd ignored warning signs that any competent engineer should have caught. Sarah tried to defend herself, presented evidence that the failure was due to a manufacturing defect in the turbine housing, not maintenance issues. But the Navy was looking for someone to blame, and a female chief engineer made an easy target. The hearing lasted 2 days. Her 23 years of flawless service record meant nothing. Shortly after, she was forced into early retirement, handed a generic dismissal letter, and escorted off the base by 2 junior officers who couldn't meet her eyes. Sarah never accepted their version of events, but she learned to live with the bitter taste of injustice. She returned to Cedar Bay, where she spent her days fixing boat engines for local fishermen and weekend sailors who paid cash and didn't ask questions about her past. The work was honest, if humble. She got calls from grizzled old fishermen whose boats were older than some of her former subordinates, and from young mechanics who still had everything to learn about the temperamental nature of marine engines. Her reputation in the civilian world grew quietly. When other mechanics gave up, when the fancy diagnostic computers came back with error messages, people started whispering, "Call Sarah Mitchell. If anyone can fix it, she can." But the whispers never quite drowned out the echo of those 2 words that had destroyed her career: negligent maintenance. Then one gray Tuesday afternoon, as autumn rain drummed against the garage windows, an unknown number lit up her phone. Sarah wiped her hands on a rag so greasy it barely helped and picked up. "Mitchell speaking. Chief Mitchell? This is Admiral Patricia Hawkins, Pacific Naval Engineering Command." Sarah's breath caught. That name carried weight. Admiral Hawkins had been just a commander when they'd briefly worked together years ago. Sharp, demanding, but fair. One of the few officers who'd ever treated Sarah as an equal rather than an exception. "Didn't think I'd ever hear your voice again, Admiral." "Neither did I. But we've got a crisis, and frankly, you're the only person I trust to handle it." Sarah walked over to her workbench, running her fingers along the edge of a disassembled carburetor. "I'm listening." "We've got a complete propulsion failure on the USS Defiance, one of our newest Wellington-class destroyers. The MT-4000 engine you helped design. 50 engineers have been through it over the past week. State-of-the-art diagnostics, computer modeling, thermal imaging, nothing. The ship's supposed to deploy in 60 hours for a classified mission in the South China Sea. If that engine doesn't run, Sarah, we're looking at a strategic failure that could shift the balance of power in the entire Pacific. Sarah stayed quiet, but her pulse quickened. Just hearing about the MT-4000 stirred something deep in her chest, part pride, part pain, part unfinished business. I don't have active clearance anymore, Admiral. You know that. It's already being processed. Emergency consultation authorization. Sarah, I need you to understand something. This isn't just about fixing an engine. 3 months ago, we discovered evidence that the failure on the Meridian wasn't due to negligent maintenance. There was a systematic cover-up. Manufacturing defects that were deliberately hidden. You were right, and we were wrong. The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. 20 years of carrying that burden, 20 years of second-guessing herself, 20 years of believing that maybe, she really had missed something critical. Send a car, Sarah said quietly, and hung up. The next morning, Sarah arrived at the gates of Belmore Naval Base carrying her father's old toolbox, the same battered red Craftsman case she'd carried aboard her first ship 3 decades ago. The base sprawled along the coastline like a steel city, with massive dry docks and warships lined up like sleeping giants. The USS Defiance was moored at the main pier, surrounded by a hive of activity. Technicians swarmed over the deck, officers huddled in urgent conversations, and the air buzzed with the tension that comes when billions of dollars of military hardware refuses to cooperate. Right away, Sarah felt the familiar sting of dismissive glances from the young guards at the checkpoint. 2 petty officers, neither looking older than 25, exchanged smirks as she approached. Name, one of them asked, barely looking up from his clipboard. Sarah Mitchell. I'm cleared for emergency consultation. Where you headed? Engineering Bay 7. The guard typed something into his computer, his expression shifting from boredom to confusion. Says here you're, former Navy? That's right. But you're. He gestured vaguely at her grease-stained work clothes, her weathered toolbox, her calloused hands. Everything about her screamed civilian contractor, not the person they'd call in to save a billion-dollar warship. I'm exactly who they asked for, Sarah said evenly. The guard shrugged and waved her through, but she caught his muttered comment to his partner. Good luck fixing a destroyer with whatever's in that thing. Sarah gave a tight smile and kept walking. Engineering Bay 7 was a cathedral of modern military technology. The space stretched 3 stories high, filled with pristine white walls, gleaming steel fixtures, and banks of computer terminals that hummed with quiet efficiency. Yellow safety lines marked hazardous areas, and overhead cranes moved with mechanical precision, handling engine components that cost more than most people's houses. In the center of it all, mounted on a reinforced platform and surrounded by diagnostic equipment that looked like something from a space program, sat the MT-4000 engine. Sarah's engine. Her innovation, her legacy, stripped down and exposed like a patient on an operating table. The sight of it took her breath away. Even dismantled, even broken, it was beautiful, compact, powerful, elegant in its complexity. She'd spent 3 years of her life perfecting the design, fighting budget committees and skeptical admirals who couldn't see past the fact that the lead engineer was a woman. Admiral Hawkins was waiting for her, flanked by a group of engineers who looked like they hadn't slept in days. Dark circles under their eyes, coffee-stained shirts, the hollow look of professionals who'd exhausted every option in their playbook. Sarah, Admiral Hawkins stepped forward, extending her hand. Thank you for coming. Patricia. Sarah shook her hand, noting the firmness of the grip, the slight relief in the Admiral's eyes. Talk to me. A tall, silver-haired man in a pristine uniform stepped forward. Ms. Mitchell, I'm Chief Engineer Commander Harrison. I understand you have some historical familiarity with this engine type. Sarah caught the subtle dismissal in his tone, historical familiarity, as if her expertise was some quaint relic from a bygone era. I designed it, she said simply. Commander Harrison's eyebrows rose slightly. Well, regardless of past contributions, we've been running comprehensive diagnostics for 8 days. The engine loses power after exactly 97 seconds of operation. We've replaced every filter, swapped out fuel injection systems, tested every circuit, recalibrated the computer controls. The diagnostic computers show no faults, but the engine simply won't maintain power under load. What about vibration analysis? Sarah asked. Completed. Multiple times. Everything's within normal parameters. Thermal imaging? Comprehensive scans. No anomalies detected. Sarah nodded, walking slowly around the exposed engine. Her eyes tracked the fuel lines, the electrical connections, the mounting points. Something was wrong, but it wasn't showing up on their sophisticated diagnostic equipment. "I need you to power up the engine," she said. Commander Harrison exchanged glances with his team. "Ms. Mitchell, we can't run a potentially damaged engine without full safety protocols in place. We risk catastrophic failure, possible explosion, definitely voiding the warranty on equipment worth $240 million. I know what it costs. I also know you're never going to find the problem by staring at computer screens. The diagnostic protocols clearly state." "The diagnostic protocols," Sarah interrupted, "were written by people who've never actually fixed anything. You want this engine running or not?" The room fell silent. Sarah could feel the weight of 24 pairs of eyes on her, some skeptical, some hopeful, some openly hostile. She'd been in this position before, the outsider challenging the established way of doing things. Commander Harrison's jaw tightened. "Even if we agreed to such an irregular procedure, our safety protocols require—" "I need complete silence in the bay," Sarah continued, as if he hadn't spoken. "No talking, no background noise, no diagnostic equipment running. Just the engine." A younger engineer, a woman with lieutenant's bars, spoke up. "Ma'am, how can you diagnose a complex propulsion system without diagnostic equipment?" Sarah reached into her toolbox and pulled out a brass rod, solid and worn smooth on both ends. Several engineers actually laughed out loud. "You're joking," Commander Harrison said. "You want to diagnose a $200 million engine with, what is that, a dowsing rod?" "It's a listening rod. My grandfather used one to tune Model T engines. My father used one to diagnose problems that stumped mechanics with 10 times his training. And I've used this one to identify failures that your computers can't even detect." "This is absurd," Harrison muttered, but Admiral Hawkins raised her hand. "Do it," she said quietly. "Run the engine." Commander Harrison looked like he'd swallowed something sour, but he nodded to his team. "Clear the bay. Safety positions. Prepare for engine startup." Klaxons sounded. Warning lights flashed. The massive bay doors sealed shut with a hydraulic hiss. Sarah walked to the engine mounting platform and placed one end of the brass rod against the engine housing, the other end pressed to her ear. "Start it," she said. The MT-4000 roared to life with a sound like controlled thunder. Sarah closed her eyes and listened, not just with her ears, but with every sense she possessed. The vibration traveled up through the brass rod, through her bones, into her brain where 3 decades of experience translated mechanical whispers into meaning. For 60 seconds, the engine ran beautifully. Smooth, powerful, exactly as she'd designed it. Then, at the 90-second mark, she heard it, a subtle change in harmonics, a whisper of discord in the mechanical symphony. "Increase throttle to 70%, she called out over the noise. The engine note rose. The change became more pronounced, not louder, but different. A frequency shift that spoke of internal movement, of something not quite where it should be. "Full throttle," she ordered. "Are you insane?" Harrison shouted. "At full throttle, if there's a catastrophic failure, do it." The engine screamed. The entire bay shook. And there it was, clear as a bell to anyone who knew how to listen. A harmonic distortion that lasted exactly 2.3 seconds, then disappeared as the engine's power management system automatically reduced throttle to prevent damage. "Shut it down," Sarah said. The MT-4000 wound down to silence. Sarah stepped away from the listening rod, her expression thoughtful. "Well?" Admiral Hawkins asked. Sarah turned to face the group of engineers, all of whom were staring at her with expressions ranging from skepticism to desperate hope. "It's not a mechanical failure," she said. "It's a resonance cascade in the turbine housing. At high RPM, the engine mount vibrations create a harmonic frequency that interferes with the magnetic bearing stabilization system. The computer interprets this as an impending failure and automatically reduces power to prevent damage." Commander Harrison blinked. That's impossible. The harmonic dampening systems would prevent any resonance cascade. Not if the mounting bolts are torqued to the wrong specification. The harmonic dampeners are designed to work with mounts torqued to exactly 847 foot-pounds. If they're even 50 foot-pounds off, you get a frequency gap that allows resonance cascade at 4,200 RPM. "But our installation specifications clearly state, your installation specifications are wrong," Sarah said flatly, "because whoever wrote them never actually mounted one of these engines. I have, 17 times. The official spec is 800 foot-pounds. I wrote a memo recommending a change to 847, but it was never officially updated. The room fell dead silent. Sarah could hear the ventilation system, the distant sound of waves against the pier, the quiet hum of standby electronics. Lieutenant Morrison, the young female engineer, spoke up hesitantly. How could you possibly know the torque specification from listening? Because every torque setting creates a different harmonic signature when the engine's under load. 800 foot-pounds gives you a clean tone. 847 gives you that tone with a slight echo at the 2.2 second mark. Anything else, and you get dissonance. She picked up her toolbox and started walking toward the exit. Retorque the mounting bolts to 847 foot-pounds. The engine will run perfectly. Commander Harrison called after her. Wait. Even if you're right, how can you be certain without running diagnostics? Sarah paused at the bay door. Because 23 years ago, I solved this exact same problem on the prototype. I wrote the report, filed the recommendation, and watched it disappear into bureaucratic limbo. Then I got blamed when the unofficial fix I'd implemented wasn't used on production models. She looked back at the exposed MT-4000 engine, her life's work laid bare and broken. Fix it or don't. My work here is done. Sarah left the engineering bay in silence, followed by the sound of urgent whispered conversations. In the jeep taking her back to the main gate, she overheard the driver muttering into his radio, "Complete waste of time. Crazy lady with a brass stick." Sarah's phone rang just as she was pulling into her driveway 6 hours later. The caller ID showed Belmore Naval Base. Mitchell speaking. Sarah? It was Admiral Hawkins, and there was something different in her voice. Something that sounded like wonder. We retorqued the mounting bolts to 847 foot-pounds. All of them. Then we ran the engine for 6 hours straight, full throttle, emergency power, combat simulation protocols. Sarah sat in her truck, engine still running, waiting. It's perfect, Sarah. Absolutely perfect. Better than factory specifications. The USS Defiance deploys in 18 hours, and it's going to be the most reliable ship in the fleet. Sarah closed her eyes. 20 years of carrying the weight of failure. 20 years of wondering if maybe they'd been right. Maybe she really had missed something critical. There's something else, Admiral Hawkins continued. I've been authorized to offer you a position as Senior Engineering Consultant, Pacific Fleet, full clearance restoration, pension credit for the years you lost, and a formal apology for the Meridian incident. Sarah sat in the quiet of her truck, listening to the familiar sounds of her neighborhood. A dog barking somewhere. Kids playing basketball in a nearby driveway. The distant sound of waves against the Cedar Bay Marina. I'll think about it, she said finally. Of course. Take all the time you need. But Sarah? I want you to know something. That brass rod of yours, that listening technique, it identified a problem that 50 engineers with millions of dollars of diagnostic equipment couldn't find. That's not just experience. That's genius. The next morning, Sarah woke to the sound of helicopter rotors. She walked outside to see a Navy Seahawk landing in the field behind her garage. Admiral Hawkins stepped out, accompanied by a young officer carrying a folder thick with official documents. I thought you might want to see this, Admiral Hawkins said, handing her the folder. Inside were 20 years' worth of incident reports, maintenance logs, and engineering analyses, document after document showing the same problem, MT-4000 engines failing after 90 seconds at full power, ships returning to port, missions delayed or cancelled. And every single time, the solution was the same: retorque the mounting bolts to 847 foot-pounds. How many ships? Sarah asked quietly. 47. Over the past 20 years. Every single Wellington-class destroyer has had this problem at least once. Your solution has been implemented 47 times, Sarah. But it was never made official because that would have meant admitting the original specifications were wrong. Sarah flipped through page after page of reports. Each one a vindication, each one proof that she'd been right all along. The USS Defiance deployed this morning, Admiral Hawkins continued. But before she left, the crew did something I've never seen before. They requested permission to rename the engine room. She handed Sarah a photograph. It showed the ship's engine compartment, pristine and powerful, with a new plaque mounted on the bulkhead, Mitchell Engineering Bay, in honor of Chief Sarah Mitchell, who taught us to listen. The offer still stands, Admiral Hawkins said. Senior Engineering Consultant. Help us fix 20 years of bureaucratic stupidity. Train a new generation of engineers to actually understand the machines they're working on instead of just trusting the computers. Sarah looked at the photograph, then at her old garage, then at the helicopter waiting to take her back to a world that had once rejected her. On one condition, she said finally. Name it. Every engineer under my supervision learns to use a listening rod before they're allowed to touch a computer diagnostic. If they're going to work on my engines, they're going to learn to understand what the machines are actually telling them. Admiral Hawkins smiled. Deal. 6 months later, Sarah stood in Engineering Bay 7, watching a class of young naval engineers practice with brass listening rods. The MT-4000 engine hummed quietly in the background, no longer a patient on an operating table but a teacher helping the next generation learn to listen. Lieutenant Morrison approached, brass rod in hand and a frustrated expression on her face. Chief Mitchell, I can hear the engine, but I can't tell what it's trying to say. Sarah smiled, remembering her own frustration 3 decades ago when her father first handed her that same brass rod. Close your eyes, she said. Don't try to analyze what you're hearing. Just listen. The engine will tell you what it needs, but only if you're patient enough to hear it. As the young engineer closed her eyes and pressed the rod to the engine housing, Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced in 20 years, the quiet satisfaction of passing on knowledge that couldn't be learned from any manual, couldn't be programmed into any computer, the kind of knowledge that lived in the hands and hearts of engineers who understood that sometimes the most sophisticated diagnostic tool was simply knowing how to listen. In the distance, the USS Defiance was returning from its mission, successful, reliable, powered by engines that hummed with perfect harmony because someone had finally learned to hear what they were saying. Sarah Mitchell had come home. If this story moved you, subscribe to Silent Valor for more stories of quiet heroes whose expertise speaks louder than their recognition. These are the people who fix what others can't, who listen when others only look, and who prove that sometimes the most valuable knowledge comes not from textbooks, but from understanding the language that machines speak to those patient enough to listen.